right, so for the last panel today,
Entonces, para el último panel de hoy,
a reminder again that we had
otro
sat down with
recordatorio,
a farmer steering
nos
committee
sentamos
multiple
con
times
un
throughout this
grupo
past year
de
to kind of
agricultores el
gather
último año
what
para
topics we want to
ver
talk
qué
about, what topics
temas
would be useful
queríamos
for the
tratar
community of everyone
y que
here
serían
to hear
útiles
about. And
para
so
la comunidad
today
aquí que
we
escucharán.
have
Entonces, hoy
Tyler Dvorak
tenemos
of Fifth Season
Tyler
Cooperative,
Dvorak de la
Ben
cooperativa
Auerbach
Fifth Season,
from
Ben
Second
Auerbach
Harvest Foodbank, and Andrew Johnston from the
del
Willy Street
Banco de
Co-op.
Alimentos Second Harvest,
So
y Andrew Johnston,
this panel will
de
be
la cooperativa Willy
talking
Street.
about determining
Este
crops,
panel
production planning,
va a
and
hablar sobre
pricing.
cómo
And this session
decidir
speaks from the
qué van
buyer
a
and distributor
sembrar,
perspective
planificación de
around crop
producción
selection,
y
planning for
precios,
production,
la
and setting fair
selección de
prices.
qué
From
sembrar,
informing which crops to grow based on markets and community needs,
basado
to
en
developing
las
production plans
necesidades de
that
la
balance
comunidad y el
labor,
mercado.
land, and risk. This discussion will highlight real-world
Entonces,
approaches that work
esta
on the ground.
discusión va
Speakers will also
a
explore pricing methods
hablar
that ensure
de los
sustainability
retos
and profitability while
reales
remaining competitive. And
de
so I'll
cómo
throw it
seguir
over to
siendo
you guys.
competitivo
And
y
Tyler, if you want to start with
cuidando
introducing yourself
gastos
and letting us
y
know what your background is, and then
planificando
we'll follow
sus
through.
productos,
Sure,
sus
thank you.
siembras. Bueno,
So
que se presenten,
I
por
started
favor.
at Fifth Season
Tyler,
Cooperative in May
yo
of
empecé en
2020,
cooperativa de Fifth Season
and
en mayo de
going into the
2020
position, I was
y entrando en la
at the
posición
time
en ese momento
growing meat
estaba
lambs, and I had a sheep operation of hair sheep
criando
on my little
borregos
farm,
para carne
and
en mi
was very
granja
interested
pequeña
in
y estaba yo muy
the local and
interesado
regional food world.
en
But I was brought into Fifth
comida
Season
local y
more
regional,
as a
pero entré
financial
en
position
Fifth
to
Season más como
keep the
una
books
posición
and run the
financiera de hacer
office
las
and
cuentas,
work
la
on the pricing and
contaduría,
the
manejar la
finances of
oficina,
the organization. And
las
COVID
finanzas
was
de
a
la
tumultuous time,
organización.
and
Y
there
pues
were
el
many
COVID
accounts we were
fue un
losing,
tiempo
new
muy
accounts we were
difícil.
having to get, and I just
Estábamos
started
perdiendo
kind of
muchas
working
cuentas
hand in hand with the other
y estaba
employees
yo
at the time,
trabajando muy cercanamente con
more
los demás
outside
empleados
of the initial purview of what they hired me to do, and I was doing well at
fuera
it, and we were kind of
de lo que me
making
habían
headway. And
pedido
then
en un
over these
inicio.
5 or so years
Y en
since,
estos 5
our
años,
warehouse manager had
nuestra
retired, and then our
gerente
marketing
de
and sales
bodega se
woman left, and
jubiló,
I just
la mujer que
eventually
hacía
started
nuestras
doing their
ventas
jobs, and we haven't
también se
backfilled those
fue
positions, and so
y no
now
hemos
I'm the sole
vuelto a llenar
employee
esas
of the
posiciones.
cooperative
Entonces,
at the
yo
office
estoy
there, and I
haciendo
run
todo
everything, and
eso.
just
Yo soy la única
if I
persona en
make
la
a sale, I
oficina
make
y
more
manejo
work for my
todo.
other 2 selves. So
Si hago una
that's
venta,
my intro, I
hago
guess.
más trabajo para mis otros 2 seres porque estoy haciendo todos los
All right, I don't know how to follow that up. That
No
was
sé
great.
cómo seguir después
My name
de
is Ben
eso.
Auerbach. I'm
Yo
the
soy
food
Ben
sourcing coordinator for
Auerbach.
Second Harvest Food Bank in
Soy
Madison.
el
We cover 16 counties in southern to
servidor de
southwestern Wisconsin.
comunidades.
Just under
Tratamos
300
con
partners that we deliver to
16
5 days a
comunidades,
week.
300
When I first started out, I've been there for 2 years. I
agricultores.
was primarily focused on produce sourcing and produce buying.
2
In the
años
past year, we
estaba
did
yo
just under 5 million pounds of produce distributed.
comprando
Now it's kind of
verduras,
merged into just
frutas y
buying
verduras.
everything in general. And as I'm sure you
2,000
can imagine from all the news about
libras
SNAP and everything, the
compramos.
past 2 weeks,
Y ahora,
coming from a
en las
long background in
últimas
retail, the
2
past 2 weeks, it felt like
semanas,
the day before Thanksgiving, just nonstop for 2 weeks in a row. It's been quite a
es
thing.
todo
So
muy rápido
one of my big joys on the job is
con
working
el
directly with
problema de
farmers.
SNAP.
And in the past year, I had a lot of fun with a program we called Market Harvest, where we basically
el
went to the
último
Dane County, the
año,
Wednesday Dane County
trabajé
Farmers
con
Market, and didn't glean, but
un
bought leftover produce,
mercado
not
de
too dissimilar actually
productores,
from the
un
program
farmers
that was
market.
starting off early this morning that we talked about first. So that's one of the
Y
great things we get to do, and a whole lot of other things too.
hacemos muchas cosas muy interesantes.
I'm Andy Johnston.
Los cuales,
I've
bueno, yo
been with
soy
the Willy
Andy
Street
Johnston.
Co-op
He estado con el Willy Street Co-op
for decades
por
and have
décadas
been in agriculture, I think, since
y
I
he
was
estado en
5 years
agricultura
old.
desde
I
que
think
tenía
I've
5 años.
held every job either on a farm or
Todos
in
mis trabajos
food
han sido
distribution,
o
in
en
retail.
la
My
granja
current
o
role is
distribución de
category
comida
manager
o venta de
for the
comida.
produce departments at Willy
Ahora
Street,
soy
which
gerente
involves
de
sourcing
frutas
product,
y
working with
verduras,
farms,
que es buscando a
setting up
quién
promotions,
comprar,
pricing, editing costs
haciendo
or auditing costs from
promociones,
vendors.
viendo los
It's actually
costos
really
de
fun. I don't manage any people,
los
and
vendedores.
I
No
love it.
manejo a ninguna persona.
Well, thank you
Solo
guys.
manejo las
Thanks for
cuentas,
that introduction.
y
So
las
I just want to
relaciones
remind
con los
everyone that
vendedores.
this panel will be open for questions throughout the entirety. And if anyone has any questions to start, please. Otherwise, I
Y
have
si
some
alguien
questions to
tiene
guide us.
preguntas, por favor, empiecen.
Okay.
Y si no,
So the
yo voy a
first
empezar.
question that
La primera
we have for you
pregunta que
guys is,
tenemos
how
para
often
ustedes
do you work with
es
farmers
qué
to
tan seguido
guide crop
trabajan con
selection and production
agricultores
planning? And
para
what
guiar
does this process look like?
qué productos van a sembrar o criar y cómo se ve ese proceso.
Yeah.
Well, at Willy Street,
En
crop
Willy Street,
selection is really
la
not
selección de
something
siembras
that we
no
often get
es
into with farms.
realmente
Most of the
algo en lo
farms
que
know
nos
what they're good at
involucramos.
growing,
La mayoría de las
and that's
huertas
what they stick
saben
to.
cuáles son sus
Typically, I
fortalezas
think what they're
y,
looking
y
at is
se,
what
y
works
se
on their
mantienen
soil,
así.
what works
Y
on the
están
land for
viendo
them,
qué funciona bien
and
en su suelo
for
y en
their
sus
size.
condiciones y
I
para
think
su
Scott
tamaño.
Williams had
Creo
mentioned
Scott
earlier
Williams mencionó
a comment
antes
about potatoes.
un comentario sobre papas.
You know, if it's just two people, does
Si
growing
son dos
potatoes work for
personas,
you? Maybe it
criando,
does. Maybe it
sembrando
doesn't.
papas, quizá funciona para
So
usted,
we're not
quizá no.
necessarily
Entonces, no necesariamente
getting into what
nos
works
metemos
well
qué funciona
for the farm.
bien
They know
para
that.
la
We're more
granja,
so
porque
letting them know
ellos ya
what
saben
works
eso.
well for
Nosotros
us.
les hacemos saber
Because
qué
at the same
funciona bien para
time,
nosotros, porque al
we
mismo
want to be
tiempo
supporting
queremos
local farms as much as we possibly
apoyar
can.
las granjas
We are a
locales lo
grocery
más
store,
posible.
and there's a bit of disconnect
Hay
with
un poco de
customers
discriminación
or
con
owners in the case of the
clientes
co-op. When they come
o
into our
dueños
store,
cuando son
they
cooperativas,
look
cuando
at our
llegan a nuestra
price of
tienda,
potatoes
ven
and they compare it to
el
every other
precio de
grocery
nuestras
store that
papas
they've been
y
in.
lo comparan con
Right?
los
So
demás
we
supermercados
want to
donde
make sure
compran.
that,
Y
we're able to
asegurar
offer the
que
farm
podemos ofrecer a la
what they
granja
need as far as
lo que
cost,
ellos
but also have a
necesitan
competitive price at the
por
same
su
time.
sus
So
costos, pero también
that's
tener
how it
un
works
precio
on our end.
competitivo
We meet with the
para
farms
nuestros
once a year.
compradores.
We review
Nos
what we
reunimos con
had
cada granja
purchased.
una vez al
Would
año,
they like to
revisamos qué
continue selling
compramos,
those items
qué
to
quieren
us?
seguir
If we
vendiendo a
have
nosotros.
ideas
Si
for
tenemos
crops that
ideas para
we're
siembras
looking for a
que
source
estamos
locally, we'll
buscando,
present it to all of the farms, usually in a
le decimos a
conversation,
todas las
sometimes in a
granjas
survey,
previamente.
try to give them an
Muchas
idea
veces con
of
una encuesta les
what
intentamos
sort of
dar una idea
volume
de qué tipo de volumen
we'd be buying from them.
estaríamos
And if
comprándoles.
they think that's going
Y
to
si
work for
ellos
their
creen
farm,
que eso les funciona,
they'll let
desde
us
su
know.
lado nos
So
avisan.
that's about it on the co-op
Es
end of things.
básicamente
Yeah, I'd
todo
say one
para
interesting thing for
nosotros.
buying for a food bank is
Para
that
nosotros
you are
también
not
comprar para un
necessarily
banco de
buying
alimentos
for
no
the customer. You're
necesariamente
definitely
estás
buying for a
comprando
patron and a
para
guest and a client, but you're also
Can we
buying for
please just slow down?
slow down.
Sorry.
Thank
Yep.
you. Yep.
Mhm.
You're buying for that person
estás
in
comprando
between
para una
who's
persona
representing where
en
the food is
medio
going to go to. So you
que
sometimes have to
representa
think
a
of
dónde va la
not just what
comida, no
would
para la
the
persona que lo
guest
va a comer,
coming to the food bank be interested
no
in,
para
or coming to the
la,
food pantry be
la
interested in, but
persona
what
que
does that
va
food
a
pantry,
llegar al
what's
banco
going to help
de
them
alimentos,
fill their
sino
shelves?
la persona
And
que
so
va a
for us,
llegar
we
al banco
found to
de
work with
alimentos.
farmers
Entonces, para
is to
nosotros vimos
really
para trabajar
try
con
to fill in extra margins to
agricultores,
give us the ability to bring in a wide
intentamos
variety of
tener
products
un margen
around
para
the
tener
big staples that we'll
una
often get in
variedad
more
grande de
commodity kind of style
productos,
things
de
like
tener
potatoes or
más
onions or
de
carrots.
cosas que se
So
piden
we
mucho,
found one of the
como
ways that we
papas,
can do that is
cebollas
to
y
get engaged with a local farmer
zanahorias.
or a local
Entonces, una
aggregator like
forma
Scott
es
and say for the
trabajar
next 12
con
months,
un
this is what we expect to actually be
agricultor
able to go through.
local o un
It's
agregador
a little
local
bit
y
of a high wire
decirnos
act, and we can
últimos,
get into
los
this later
siguientes
maybe
12
in
meses
terms of
pensamos
funding,
que
which can
vamos a
often throw a
necesitar
food bank
eso.
for a
A
loop.
veces es
But it
un
does
poco
help that
difícil,
farmer or aggregator know that, hey, if I could
un
get
poco
collards for these
difícil
3 months, that would mean a lot.
decirlo
If
de
I could get
antemano,
depend on
pero
really good premium apples for 4 months,
intento
that would mean a
decirles, bueno,
lot,
si
et
puedo
cetera,
depender a
as the
tener
different crops
buenas
grows.
manzanas, eso
Otherwise,
sería
very
muy bueno
much
para
like
mí, o
Andrew,
muy
basically
buenos
buying to
apios,
fill
eso lo
where we have gaps at
compraría
that
y así.
moment in ways where we
Pero
can't really provide that
en
much feedback
general
early on in terms of what
estamos
gets planted
intentando
or
llenar
what gets done. A combination
faltas
between those
que
two.
existen en el momento y no siempre sabemos qué va a ser.
At fifth season, we're a multi-stakeholder cooperative, which I don't think we'll take the time to get into it.
Fifth
But
season somos
basically what that means is that
una
both sides
cooperativa
of any deal that we're
donde
doing could potentially be members. So our buyers and our distributors that we're selling to are also able to be members of the cooperative. They don't have to be members, but they can join. And then the producers and growers are members, and even myself as a worker is a class of membership. So the entire system is all able to have an ownership stake in that system, which is, it's a pretty interesting idea if you kind of follow through the logical process of thinking it through. But that's not really what we're talking about here, but I preface it with that to say it makes it very interesting to plan for the future when you potentially are making a contract with yourself. I don't know how else to kind of put that. And so to the best of my ability, I try to do that, but it really hasn't worked out in practice that much. A couple of success stories that we can, kind of stay positive here to talk about is I've had success planning for growers to grow like a certain variety of like ultra butternut squash for processing. And then had a buyer that before planting season had committed to 30,000 pounds or a full semi-load of these. And then I had a couple of growers willing to go plant out some of their ground that wasn't really going to be in production to be able to harvest that. And then these were Amish growers, so they had plenty of labor available to them when the trucks came to be filled. And that was pretty successful. Low value as far as cents per pound, but overall good for the cooperative because at a high quantity like that, there is a bit of meat on the bone still for us to make a little bit of money as a cooperative. And then the farmers were the ones who, made that decision to do all that labor at such a low price per pound, 10, 15, 20 cents a pound or whatever we ended up doing that deal at. So things like that had worked. But in general, it just tends to be what we're hearing from almost everybody. The farmers know what they're good at. They know what they enjoy growing, what they want to grow. Grow as much of it as you can, and then we're going to try to be the first ones to sell it because nobody's exclusive with us at the moment. So if they can find somebody else that's going to buy it either earlier or for more money, they definitely take advantage of those opportunities.
Thank you, guys. Any questions so far? Okay, well, I have a follow-up question for you guys. Kind of thinking about that price point and price transparency and how you relate to farmers. What equitable practices does your organization follow for communicating that price transparency? Does that include like contract or guarantee buying for a season when working with those small producers?
I could jump off from the start here. There's actually a couple different ways that we will do it with Second Harvest Food Bank, and I think not too dissimilar for other institutions of our type. And that is that we often have different types of buying where there'll be different types of communication in terms of being open. One thing, for instance, our Market Harvest program, where we were at the market for 26 weeks, we started off that whole season with a pre-published list of what we would pay per item. It was like 90 items long. Each item already had a price per pound. Some of it was built through farmer feedback in the prior seasons. We're always doing surveys and getting collected feedback. So that's one way to just have that complete transparency. One thing with food banking is that, at least in our case, all the produce we're distributing is free. Like no partner that's getting it is paying for it. So we don't need to be, besides making a budget, we don't need to be concerned about, how something might cost on the end. So it really does free us to figure this out. Another version would be something where we basically do contract, similar to what you've heard other people talk about today, where we do contract for X amount of food over a season. And this could be a small contract from 2,500. It could be larger, all the way up to 30,000, somewhere in that kind of range. And through that contract, we'll set presets of, hey, we need X amount of pounds over this time. If you can't meet this because, hey, might be drought, might be terrible weather, maybe you have horrible staff issues, who knows? Then you can sub it with a different product. There could be other variations like that. And then finally, at the end of the year, we kind of close it off and say, hey, we've bought to that contract with you. Through the contract, we actually start off trying to give our farmers a boost by paying out half of it at the beginning of the year. And that's to aid in planting, to aid in seeds, to aid in staff, et cetera, and then as the end of the year goes, slowly pay it out to finish the contract. I don't want to put someone on the spot here, but we actually have someone in this room who's part of our program for that last year, or this past year, I should say, and it's a really interesting, different way to do purchasing rather than through an aggregator or rather than at the markets.
Thank you. Yeah. Man, I wish we could all function that way and didn't have to worry about buying at the end. Andrew or Tyler, do either of you have anything to say to that question?
You know, at the Willie Street Co-op, our cost is pretty much determined by the farm. So historically, farmers set their price, and how they do that, I don't know. I think a lot of it is conversation with other farms. And again, you know, we're not buying semi-loads. We contract, we call it an agreement, where we will commit to buying a specific product from a specific farm when they have that product available. If they don't have that product available, other farms will support those other farms if they have it available locally. But, you know, I think on our end, it provides the farm somewhat of assurance of what their expectations of us are, what we'll be purchasing, give or take, weekly from that farm. And the co-op, we are not, you know, we don't get grants. We are a for-profit business. We budget for 1% profit on our annual budget. So there's not a lot of room in there for error. That provides us a level of efficiency when working with local farms. Currently on our list right now, we have 3 regional vendors and 25 local farms that we're working with. So, and that we have 3 retail locations and a kitchen facility. There needs to be a roadmap for those individuals, for those buyers who are working with the farms, so that we can do that efficiently, support the farm, and still stay in business.
Thank you. Yeah. Tyler, anything on your end?
About pricing?
Yeah, or, you know, just what goes into how you communicate, you know, what on the 5th season end.
With the transparency.
Yeah.
I think folks might find it interesting that when I first got to 5th Season Cooperative, our current president at the time was maybe driving this, but just overall how the cooperative was formed and the folks involved, it was an extremely transparent cooperative. And I've actually worked over the past 5 years to try to fix that a little bit, because it was transparent to a fault, in my opinion. There was a lot of kind of unnecessary angst being caused amongst the farmers and their families, and based upon where their products were going and what price it was being sold for at those end places, and then maybe somebody else got paid more for the same vegetable on a given week or something, and it's too complex of a system to be able to have everybody see their perspective of the system and have everybody be happy. The system itself is happiest if all those little parts and pieces have a little bit of a veil that they can't quite see everything, because nobody has the whole picture. And if they would have the whole picture, then they would see how it came to be that they got $1 less per pound. They have to trust the cooperative, myself operating, our buyers, like a little bit, that the price ended up where it was in a kind of a faithful way. So I don't hide things, but I don't specifically make a point to inform every farmer what the other guy got paid. And it's worked like a lot smoother that way. And I think it ends in us trying to pay the highest price, because the cooperative, we set margins. So I can't sell products at a margin beyond where we've agreed upon in a given pool that it has to be set. And so if I sell somebody's products for a little bit less, then they're going to get paid less. But it may be something that gets us future sales, and they're going to be selling more volume that they wouldn't have sold if I wouldn't have made that sale. So I don't tie myself to, well, I sold the product for X price last week, like at a fixed pricing scenario. If a buyer wants to buy that product the following week, but for less, I kind of have to make the sale if the sale's in front of me.
Yeah.
And a lot of those buyers are part of our cooperative. So I have to trust them as a member of the cooperative that they're not taking advantage of us. And so it's kind of a trust-based thing.
Yeah. I feel like
it's difficult things to think about, but I try to not turn down sales just because our price isn't being met.
Definitely. And I think, throughout this entire day, we've been thinking and talking about how like the variability of price, just it's ever changing, and people like you as an aggregator and farmers alike have to constantly adapt to that. And I think what you're also getting at is like no one can see the full picture of all of, the entire system and all of the logistics that go behind. And so, seeing parts of it and taking it for, maybe just not fully understanding what it is, and those feelings of upset, I think it's really important to cultivate that trust. So yeah, thank you guys. Kind of switching over, unless we have any questions right now in the crowd in regards to price transparency and that kind of stuff. Yes. Okay, great.
Real straightforward. Tyler, who are Fifth Season's primary buyers?
Most of our volume goes to big distributors like Cisco and Performance Foods by a tonnage, dollar value type of a situation. But we have a number of smaller relationships that I've tried to cultivate with, I guess, like CSAs or farm stores that need to shore up their production by buying, other good, relatively local organic produce. So I do a bit of that. And then we have schools and hospitals that buy our IQF frozen products mostly. But that's pretty much where it goes. And those big distributors, just to touch back on the pricing, I would have to pay a monthly, like $700 a month or something, to find out where our products are going and in the end. And so they build in this secrecy as well. And they say it's for our own good too. And there's a very interesting system to be a part of.
Yeah. Any questions from the crowd? Any other questions right now? Cool. So kind of going back to that, what you're saying with working with big distributors and thinking about like market positioning, maybe Ben, you can't speak to this so much, but how do you manage that premium price that comes with buying local? And what priorities do you set forth in your organization so you can continue to support and buy locally? And maybe Andrew, you can speak to this as well.
I don't know. It's really, I think it's interesting. I have been in, retail for years, and we have heard COVID brought up multiple times, and There has recently been a lot of inflation, cost of labor, and, I think that the co-op is fortunate in that our owners, our customers, they place a high value on locally produced, locally sourced goods. But what's the ceiling? That I don't know, And personally, over the years, my opinion is that local, for those of you who aren't familiar with Willie Street, our priority is organic and local organic. But I just, I really don't know. I don't know. I think that they're, for costs to become, maintain their competitiveness with, to some degree, of standard conventional grocery stores, there may be some changes that are necessary in the future. And I think Tyler, fifth season, that might be part of the solution.
Yeah, definitely.
Hard to say.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about, I'm sorry, Tyler, if you want to speak to this, but Ben, I was saying maybe you can't, but I think maybe you can too, just thinking about, those limited grants that you do get and how you decide, like what makes sense even with that higher price point,
Yeah, I do absolutely remember, especially from my time working for a company which collectively was known as Whole Paycheck, like knowing what you would price something at and knowing that that kind of increase you had to do for a local product was a tough thing. For that company, the answer was to blend it with other items. But that doesn't necessarily work for everyone, but it can be a very tough thing in terms of how to price that local thing. For me, I value it because when I go shop at Willie Street, and I do and I love it, I'll buy TP carrots all year round until they run out, and then I'm not interested in the California carrots. Like that's why I shop at Willie Street, right? So at least there's like a customer that you can imagine, like who's going to drive that and value what that cost might be. For us, a couple different ways. One thing with grant purchasing is that you need to have an organization that's strong enough to think of the value behind that grant purchasing that goes past the simple pounds that you can bring in and distribute. So for Second Harvest, it was really important that we saw the value of having local product, having that higher nutritious product rather than the big bulk commodity stuff we could bring in, and making sure that that would always be an underlying part of what we have, no matter the grant kind of situation. So for instance, right now, we have very little access to grants at the moment. Most everything local I'm buying is just purely out of our general kind of fundraising or what other kind of access to funds that we have, not through specified grants. But you need to keep some part of that going because it's important to have that food flowing out so you have access to those partners and those aggregators. So when those funds do come, and they do come at different times, you're able to almost flip a switch and jump back in and be like, great, let's ramp this back up. And now we can really get this buying going again and again. Not the easiest thing to hear if you're a farmer. You want that reliability year to year, but still having those relationships at least so you can have that kind of process of being able to turn the switch. In terms of pricing, that also freed us up, Paulina, because we got away from thinking, well, with this grant, let's buy the highest amount of pounds we could, and started thinking, how can we put this money back in the community? A lot of our farmers, this wouldn't surprise any of you, are clients at some of our food pantries, right? So it made sense for us to actually make sure to pay a living amount that would be useful for them to have and to depend on, whether it's through an aggregator or through direct. And so we saw value as to why we might pay 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pounds per pound of what it would be for a giant truck of carrots coming out of Quebec or something.
Thank you. And Tyler?
I think I can maybe give one general idea that maybe people can just marinate on, and then one very specific example where it helped our co-op and our members. So the general idea is thinking about this local premium pricing that we're talking about, and trying to flip it on its head a little bit and think about how could we provide a local discount. And I kind of started thinking about this because the world I came from before fifth season, I was consulting with grazers in the Southwest Wisconsin and working with kind of like grass-based farmers, beef and lamb and those things. And a big thing I would be trying to get across is that these organic rotational grazers, they're the low-cost producer. They have way less inputs. They can produce more pounds of an animal on less acres of land, and land is getting very expensive. And so I was pushing some of these grazers to try to grow their volume, lower their prices, and get competitive with the national meat prices, and that I thought it could be a way they could be successful, and we had some success in that. So I brought this to fifth season, and we looked at what products do we offer that are not going to be hit by inflationary forces as much. And we kind of took maple syrup as an example, and we just have a couple of maple syrup growers, or at least we did, and they said, well, you know, we harvest our own wood, we boil the sap down over a wood fire in our sugar shack here, that, you know, we just don't have much input cost whatsoever. And if we're doing gallon glass bottles, those bottles are getting a little bit more expensive, and there are some things that are increasing, but in general, our cost of production hasn't changed. And I looked, and we hadn't raised the cost of our maple syrup by the gallon to Performance Foods, which, you know, was Reinhardt Foods, but one of our big buyers of that, since about 2015. So 5 years, 6 years before we started having this conversation. And I said, over the next few years, let's keep this exactly the same where it is. And let's watch all the rest of the maple syrup and the Performance Foods catalog keep going up month after month after month. And let's see what it does for our sales. And we have a member of Performance Foods on our board, and so I had a little bit of insight into seeing the catalog and what costs were and what was going to be happening. But to just, you know, end the story with the specific result, at that time when we had that conversation with our syrup growers, we were buying about a flat pallet of gallons, which is 30 gallons of maple syrup once a month. And I was switching back and forth between the two growers each month. And this past month, we sold 7 pallets of maple syrup in 1 month. And I'm not only buying from each of those 2 growers each month, but they've had families in their community start producing maple syrup to be able to get the volume that we need. And going forward next year, they're going to be producing more volume, and it's just been growing. And they're happy with the price. And I said, if we keep the price the same for the next 10 years, and you have 10 more families in your community that are producing this Amish organic maple syrup, that's a win for us. And that local discount has kind of been a successful tool.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so cool how, you know, in the aggregator kind of like bird's eye view, you can see that and advocate for them and push for them to kind of keep doing that work that'll allow those prices to stay competitive while also benefiting the farmers. Thank you. Any questions from the crowd at all? Yeah.
This is probably a question mostly for Andrew. I visited the Viroqua Food Co-op and the Menominee Food Co-op in Eau Claire somewhat recently, and they do a really great job of having big advertisements or posters, information about the farmers that they are selling products from. Because buying local, if you are paying a premium for it, I mean, it's most oftentimes for a lot of people a values decision. And I think that when those values are celebrated and marketed and part of the decision making that you're doing at the grocery store, more people may be inclined to make those those choices. So I'm wondering if there are any strategies that the Willy Street Co-op uses to kind of do some consumer education around what buying local means for food dollars staying in our communities, for land being stewarded in most oftentimes a better way, etc.
Yes. Yeah, there are. I think a lot of that falls more under our owner services. They do a lot of outreach with our producers beyond produce, right? Because we're working with meat producers, soap, every product you can imagine that is produced locally, you're going to find it at Willy Street. So yes, they are doing that work, and throughout our store, I believe it's called it's not Know Your Maker. Can't remember what it is for sure. Yeah, I wish, but it's not. It might be Know Your Producer. They've got posters up above the coolers, all throughout the store of all the different farms and producers that we work with who are local. So, but they do also, I can't remember like the details, but they break down for every dollar that's spent on a local item at your co-op, X% of that stays in the community versus an item that was not produced locally. So yeah, they do that work.
Cool.
Yeah, I think
Any other
education is a huge component, right? Because it is, we're a business. We want to grow. We want new customers. And for those individuals not familiar with local food systems, we want to be the impetus of that education. Like, here it is. It's right in front of you.
Yeah. Thank you. Any questions? Any more questions? I'll go here first, and then I'll go that way.
I have a question for Ben. As someone who does procurement at a food bank, especially nowadays, knowing that food banks are operating with extremely limited funding to buy food, how do you start to prioritize what purchases you're going to make local?
Great question. I'll say it's definitely a fluid situation where, for instance, a month ago we thought we would be is already very different from where it is now. And our funding has already been spent in different ways than maybe our best laid budget could have presumed. We start off, at least in the food bank world, with kind of we call them hard seven produce items that we need to make sure we have no matter what. It doesn't mean I don't buy those locally, but I can buy more locally if I'm buying those hard seven usually from the big or frankly agribusiness kind of places, because it opens up more funding by all the cost savings in that to buy from the other kind of areas. The other part of that is to make sure you have leadership that you are basically selling as to the value of that local produce at all times, because you need to make them understand that is not just the straight bang for your buck on pounds per dollar, or dollars per pound, I should say, but the value of everything else that comes with it. And part of that is almost kind of a rallying cry for all of our farmers here. Like, the value you bring to places and institutions with your ability to go and talk about product or to be involved in, like, for instance, Scott has literally gone to grant applications seminars for us to kind of say, hey, Second Harvest can distribute stuff. I'm sure this Kyle from Hungry Task Force could tell a very similar story for many of the people they work with. Like, that's immense kind of value, and that's important not just to the people making the decisions, but frankly to people that are being voted into office. They want to know that that money is being spent locally. So there is a lot of value for that, but it's just continuing to get the biggest bang for your buck of the real basics so you can spread yourself thinner in all the other areas and do the things that really kind of have good return for what people want, rather than just, here's a potato. You know, potatoes are great, by the way. I don't mean anything bad by that.
Any other questions? I think I saw, yes.
Can any of you make comments about the Amish produce auctions and Fenimore and others? Do you buy from them, and what's been your experience? We talk a lot about trying to get the price up for the farmer and the farmer being able to pay their employees a living wage, and I see that as a counter trend, I guess.
It's been something that we feel has directly reduced the volume of produce we sell every year. So it's been a negative for fifth season cooperatives business to lose business to the produce house, these auction houses. What happens is fifth season is smaller. Many of our growers are Organic Valley members, and they're buying the vast majority of the volume that they produce. And then because they're producing all of this product for Organic Valley, they have a bit of excess, and then I can get a hold of that. And so that's the relationship I have. But it's harder to deal with me and have me find a market and be selling through me than it is to just take your excess that you didn't sell to Organic Valley and just bring it to the auction house. So we've seen a bit of a loss there, as well as we're having a number of our members drop their organics certifications because of the expense and time, and finding that it's just easier for them to bring their produce right to the auction house, take the price of the day, move on with their lives. No organic cert, no really just they're valuing their time. And so I've gotten letters from growers that said, you know, sorry, we're leaving the cooperative, we dropped our organic cert, I'm just bringing everything to the auction house. So they've been a negative to our system, but that's a farmer making a decision for their family, and they want to do that instead. So it's not really for me to judge whether it's good or bad, you know, in the world.
Thank you, Tyler. Any other questions from the crowd? I've got a few questions left on my paper. Yeah, okay. I guess a follow-up to that, thinking about like organic certification and what that means, you know, at Willy Street Co-op, for example. Is it exclusively organic produce that you guys buy? And then follow up, like, is there any push for, you know, advocacy for these small farmers who may not be able to afford the certification, but are essentially, you know, doing these organic practices? Has there been any kind of like movements towards that?
We do work with a few farms who are not certified organic, and typically those are on products that there just aren't organic growers. I think an example right now would be, you know, we work with 2 organic apple orchards, and they've had a couple rough years in a row here. We don't have any local organic apples at the moment. We work with a grower out of Door County. They use integrated pest management, so they are not certified organic, but we're selling their product.
Okay.
Lots of it. Do we advocate for those growers? Not so much. It's complicated, right? I mean, there are a lot of people out there who are, why would I get certified organic? My practices are superior. I'm using biodynamic. I'm not biodynamic certified. I'm incorporating pest integrated pest management and organic methods. You know, maybe they're doing fine through markets other than Willy Street Co-op with that strategy. But I think when we talk about food safety, things like that, I don't know. There's some benefits that come with that organic certification. At least, I think both for the grower and the retailer.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions in the crowd? Yeah.
I guess I have a similar question to the last one, and that's like, at what point do you find it's your responsibility to, I mean, Tyler, you kind of brought it up with like the auction houses, but like to advocate for growers that choose to use better labor practices. I mean, a lot of you're going to have a cheaper product if somebody's not paying their labor or has like very, just shitty labor practices. So it's like, at what point is that your responsibility? At what point is that policy's responsibility? What shapes policy? Is it our consumer and production practices coming out of this room? How do you guys look at that?
I could jump in it from the start, and it's kind of a hard metric and a soft metric. A hard metric is we actually have a spreadsheet where you can basically, for vendor to vendor, we can kind of grade where they're at in different ways, including employee wages to employee treatment to are they in Wisconsin, et cetera, et cetera. Those are very useful when we have access and the ability to buy from a wider variety of vendors and farmers. The softer metric is simply remembering that we need to be buying from vendors and farmers that have the same values as us. I mean, it's all part of not just building a strong food system, but for us, addressing food insecurity. Like, it means so much more to buy locally and from the local farmers and from local farmers that are doing a great job with their employees and with having a sustainable business than it would for us to just bid on some random truck passing through Wisconsin or something. That's basically how it bubbles down in terms of second harvest, and for not all, but for many food banks, a very much similar kind of a ethos for that.
That's a tough question, Sam. I think as a cooperative that I can speak for fifth season and where we draw our membership from in the region, and the process that we have does involve a bit of the one thing is we make farm visits to our farms, and we have our own kind of internal auditing that goes on with the practices of our farms. So myself, I'm a board member as well, and I can speak for the other board members. I know that if we felt that we had a member farm that was an unethical farm by however our standards, where it would meet that threshold, it would even become a conversation piece that we would likely just cease doing business with them. So there's kind of an internal check within the cooperative there. But those kind of judgment calls are kind of difficult to make. And then maybe just an overarching, I can end my statement with saying, I used to have a 5-county region where I would visit farms when I was working with the RC&D in the region, and as well as now visiting a lot of produce farms and just having neighbors. I've seen organic produce growers farms who have a number of acres in organic produce production, but then the rest of their farm is continually grazed by horses, nipping it down to the dirt with eroded streams and terrible ecological conditions on the total of their acreage. And then I've seen neighbors who are conventional corn and bean farmers with grass waterways and lots of their tillable land in CRP with managed woodlands and doing an exemplary job of land stewardship. And so it's even difficult at the organic conventional level to say who is running a farm by better practices. It's really tough stuff.
All right. I do feel I have a pretty important question, and I saved it for the end. We have about 10 minutes left. But what are you guys doing to buy more culturally relevant crops? Considering that also most people needing or utilizing culturally relevant crops are accessing through food security programs. So maybe this is a little directed towards Ben, but if the other two want to speak to it, you're welcome to as well.
Apoyo social.
Sorry for the pause. It's just kind of a vast answer, honestly, because it touches on a lot of different things with second harvest. I'll break it down a couple different ways. For us to buy culture representative things is that one thing we need to understand what the guests at the partners, the food pantries they serve, what they are looking for. We can very confidently set out and say, I'm going to buy 3 pallets worth of chayote, and I don't know if that's actually going to get distributed or ordered. It's just kind of my impression that there will be a need for that. So it starts with by talking to the buyers at each of those individual food pantries of what they're looking for, and then even better if we can, going to those food pantries and doing surveys with the patrons that are going there to get an idea of what they are looking for as well. After that, you can kind of build a mission of here's what we are looking to add on of more culturally representative goods. There's different formats for that. For instance, answering that question for like a dry shelf stable thing is very different than a fresh produce item. If it's fresh produce, because any fresh produce thing we bring in is ordered and off in our cooler, we have 80 cooler pallet spots in our cooler, is often gone within a day of it being available online. It's usually, for me, a thing of what can I bring in that enough partners will want, that addresses a culture responsive need, that's not going to take away from that extra pallet of tomatoes that I know would have gone to. So then it becomes almost kind of like a hunt of here's what this is. And we've done small steps, not all the steps, but for instance, last year we started carrying tomatillos pretty much, I don't know, 5, 6 weeks in a row during the height of the season for them last year, which we hadn't the year before. That's one small example there. The other example is going and having, earlier I talked about those direct contracts. That's also a very, very good way. We work with one farmer who has lots of West African garden eggs. And because we know he can grow that, an amazing farmer, by the way, Sekirao, because we know he can grow that, that's what we distinctly ask him to do, because we know there's a need for that kind of product to be distributed among our service area. And it's not going to be met on some giant produce order board. It might not even be met by our aggregators because the aggregator may not have enough customers for it. So it's a combination of those two things.
Thank you. Andrew or Tyler, do you guys feel you have anything to add to that?
I think at the co-op, it's we recently opened, and by recently, the last 5, 6 years, opened a location of retail on the north side, and we were anticipating that the demographics of the neighborhood were more diverse than our east or our west location. And we took that into account with our product line. And, you know, as a for-profit business, if it sells, we're going to carry it. You know, we want to provide that service to the members of the community. And what was interesting is that over time, you know, we tracked our sales of certain items, conventional versus organic, and we've made a lot of changes. Unfortunately, in my opinion, that have weeded out a lot of those products. You know, there just wasn't enough demand, and it's a huge store, but there's the space for them, but people just weren't buying them. So,
right, yeah. On my way.
Andrew, just to follow up to that, do you kind of, the co-op keeps track of the demographics that buy from the co-op? Because just thinking about, you're talking about the north side and the diversity, but also taking into account the income level of people that live on the north side and who will go and buy at the co-op.
they do, on a voluntary basis. They do send out surveys to owners where there's a range for their income, ethnicity, all of that. So yeah, I mean, they are keeping track of it, but again, it's restricted to owners.
pero está restringido a dueños de casas.
I'll say too, I doubt Andrew's going to toot his own horn with this, but as a former grocery manager, we're about 5 minutes away from the north side, Willy Street, and it's a fantastic store. I'd encourage anybody, if you have a chance, to actually go visit it real quick as you leave today. I think it's wonderful, wonderful store, and has an amazing amount of fresh produce in it that you would not expect for a store of that size.
Thanks. Any other questions?